Hey everyone, it's Coach Matt over here at Primal Athlete Training Center, www.primalatc.com. Answering a question today on wind. Now, a question was sent into my email from somebody that wanted to know how wind can positively or negatively affect your throws, and if there's a way to get around wind if there was for some reason a really bad wind that day, if it was really gusty that day, how you can still get really good throws if you are in a really windy area. Now, the question itself is pretty easy, and it's not exactly what a lot of people will think when they first watch this video. Wind is only going to affect two throwing events in track and field. That's the discus and the javelin. Quite frankly, the hammer is just not, it's too heavy. The hammer is not going to be affected. The wind's not going to push the hammer one way or the other when you throw it. And the shot put is also just too heavy. Wind is going to have very little to no effect on the shot when it is thrown. Discus and javelin are the only two that are going to have a real, either a positive or a negative effect when it is windy out. Now, common sense is going to tell us, just from playing other sports growing up, that when you're throwing something, you want the wind at your back. This, for the discus and the javelin, could not be further from the truth. The reason being is that when you release a discus, you're throwing that discus up in the air. So when you're throwing that discus up in the air, it's going up at an angle. Well, if you have a really strong tailwind, if you have a really strong wind at your back when you release that discus, the wind is going to actually hit the discus, because now you have a big surface area. The wind is going to hit that discus and actually bat it down to the ground. Same holds true. Get my fake javelin with the javelin. When you throw the javelin, you're throwing that javelin up at an angle. So if you have that tailwind, if you have that javelin coming from behind, the wind coming from behind, it's going to hit that javelin and actually knock that javelin down to the ground. So with that being said, a lot of people think, well, if that's the case, if a really bad tailwind is bad, then a really big headwind is good. And that's not necessarily the case either. If you have, or you're throwing into a really big headwind, when you throw that discus, it's going to be going up in the air. And just like there's a big surface area where the wind can knock it down from behind, when you throw into the wind, there's a really big surface area that the wind can catch it. And if you've ever thrown into the wind, a lot of times what you see is that the discus will go up, the wind will literally stop it, and then it'll fall flat down to the ground. It doesn't have the chance to turn over and then go down toward the ground to gain those precious extra couple of feet or couple of yards or meters onto your throw. Same holds true for the javelin. If you throw that javelin up in the air and you have a really big headwind, you think to yourself, well, the javelin's going to just float above the wind and carry. But if you have a really big headwind, the javelin will actually stop and sometimes either come down tail first or just drop straight down to the ground. It just drops like a rock out of the sky. So what's the best wind for the javelin and for the discus? Well, let's start with javelin. Javelin, the best wind is going to be a headwind. However, it's not going to be a strong headwind. The best wind to throw into for the javelin is going to be a very mild, a very light headwind. The reason for that is, just like if you've ever thrown a frisbee, and sometimes you see that frisbee, if you throw it correctly and it catches a gust of wind, it kind of pops up in the air, kind of stair steps up in the air. The javelin will do the same thing. If there's a very mild, a very light breeze coming at you, and you throw the javelin in the air, that very light breeze will help to carry that javelin further. The discus is completely different. The discus, if you're a right-handed thrower, you want to see a little bit of a wind coming across the sector from the right sector to the left. The reason for that is because if you are a really good javelin thrower, really good discus thrower, rather, when you're throwing it, you're putting a clockwise spin on the discus, which means that as the discus is flying in the air, it's actually just not flying up and out. It's flying up, and almost, if you're putting enough spin on it, it's going to actually carry over and drop down at an angle. So it's not just going to go straight out and straight down. It's going to go out and kind of carry over on an angle. And when that happens, if there's a crosswind coming from your right side to your left side, and that discus starts to turn over a little bit, well, now the wind is going to catch the surface area underneath the discus and help to pop it in the air and push it a little bit further as it's coming down, and that's going to gain you on a really great throw. If you're, say, 170, 180 foot discus thrower, that's going to give you a couple of feet if the wind is coming and everything's perfect. The exact opposite, if you're a left-handed thrower, you're putting a counterclockwise spin on the discus. So when you throw it with the left hand, the discus is actually going to start to turn and go toward the right, kind of hook a little bit to the right as it lands. So if you're a left-handed thrower, you would want to see wind coming from the left side, from the left sector, all the way across to the right sector. And again, if you're a great discus thrower and you're throwing it over 170 feet, 180 feet, if you catch that wind perfect, then it is going to put an extra few feet on your throw. Now the sort of catch to this is that if you are a beginner discus thrower, if you are a beginner javelin thrower, say you're throwing the javelin 75, 80 feet, 100 feet, you're throwing the discus, again, 80 feet, 100 feet, the wind really isn't going to do much to help you. Okay? You really have to be able to put a ton of spin on that discus. You really have to be able to chuck that javelin really far in order to see any positive effect from a good wind. You're not just going to take an 80-foot discus thrower or a 100-foot javelin thrower, put them in a slight headwind, and all of a sudden they're going to be throwing 200 feet. That's not the way it works. The best wind in the best conditions at the perfect time of year is only going to give you maybe a few feet. If you're throwing in the 170s, 180s, 190s, you're going to get a few feet from it. So don't try to chase the wind. Don't think that it's going to give you some type of a huge advantage if there is a lot of wind. That just is not going to happen. Now, the second part of the question, is there any way to combat wind if you have a really bad wind, or if the wind seems to constantly be at your back or constantly be gusting at you from the front? And the answer, quite frankly, in the javelin, if you have a big enough field, you may be able to paint a javelin sector on the grass facing in an opposite direction where you're going to be able to get a little bit of advantage from the wind. Is it really worth it? Well, if you're a few inches away from making nationals, or if you're a few inches away from getting first place in a big state meet or a big regional meet, yeah, then maybe throwing into that slight headwind, taking the time to move that sector around, getting that extra couple inches, that extra foot or two, that might make a big difference, but it's also going to be helping out the other people too. So is it worth doing? That's really up to you. That's up to the coach, and if it's something that you want to take the effort to do. Discus, unfortunately, you're stuck. You're in a cage that's cemented down to the ground. You're in a cement circle. Typically, you don't have the space to turn around and throw the other way, or turn around and throw to your right or to your left. There's a cage in the way. So if the wind is not blowing right for your discus throw, if the wind is not blowing right for your discus cage, you're stuck. You're going to have to learn to deal with it. Maybe try angling that discus down a little bit if there's a slight tailwind or headwind, so that there's less surface area for that discus to catch. Guys, this is a great question and a great example of why it's so important for you to keep asking these questions. I would have never thought to answer a question on wind or to talk about wind in a million years had this person not sent in the question. So make sure, if you have problems with your throw, if you have questions on training or anything else involving the sport of throwing in track and field, email those questions to matt@primalatc.com, or you can check out our Facebook page. Just search Primal Athlete Training Center on Facebook and it'll pop right up. Click like and you can ask all the questions that you want right there on the page. We have a lot of fans who might be able to chime in and help you out too. And if the question's a good one like this one was today, we'll get it answered for you on video. Hope to hear from you soon.